He was a prophet once. He built an empire out of blue jeans and burning crosses and the belief of 10,000 people who thought he spoke for God. He died at 78 inside a federal medical facility, having spent every day since his conviction behind a locked door. 175 years, not a metaphor, a real sentence on a real piece of paper for taking children across state lines for sex. Hold that number, 175 years. Now look at this man, same decade, same country, same crime in its bones. A man who used the name of God to take what wasn't his. Except this one is on television tonight, selling bottled water to people who can't afford their heart medication. He has never spent a single night in a cell for it. Tonight, 15 cases, 15 people who wore the collar, held the microphone, claimed the anointing, and by the end, you're going to understand exactly what separates the man who dies in a cell from the man who dies free, because it was never the crime that decided it. Some of these 15 you already know. Some of them, I'd bet, you're hearing for the first time tonight, right now. That gap between the names that went viral and the names that didn't is itself part of the story I'm about to tell you. Because it turns out the algorithm and the justice system have almost identical blind spots. We start at the bottom of the sentence with the man whose punishment came with no ceiling at all. Before we go further, 3 ground rules, because they matter for every single name that follows. Rule 1. 5 of the 15 people in this video have not been convicted of anything. They have been charged, arrested, indicted. In America, that is not the same as guilty, no matter how disturbing the allegation sounds when I read it out loud. I will use the words alleged, charged, and according to prosecutors for every one of those 5 cases, every single time, because the presumption of innocence doesn't get suspended just because a story is compelling. Rule 2. I am not ranking these cases by how evil each person is. I don't think that's a knowable, provable metric, and I don't trust anyone, including myself, to render that judgment fairly on camera. What I am tracking, case by case, is something narrower and more measurable. What actually happened to each of them legally, and why the outcomes span from a man who will die in prison to a man who has never even been charged. Rule 3. Every dollar figure, every sentence length, every date in this video comes from court records, sentencing documents, or verified news reporting. If a detail couldn't be confirmed, it isn't in this script. 15 names, 4 tiers, 1 machine underneath it all. Let's begin. There's one thing about this first case nobody outside the FLDS fully understands. He's been in prison for over a decade, and he may still be, right now, the most powerful man in the room. We'll prove that before this case ends. Warren Jeffs inherited his position the way a king inherits a throne. His father, Rulon Jeffs, led the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a breakaway sect that split from mainstream Mormonism generations earlier, holding on to the practice of polygamy long after the main church abandoned it. When Rulon died in 2002, Warren didn't campaign for leadership. He didn't need to. In FLDS theology, the title of prophet passes as a direct line from God, and the community simply accepted that God's voice had moved to a new mouth. That single word, prophet, is the entire mechanism of this case, and it's worth understanding before anything else. In a normal institution, a leader's authority is checked by something, a board, a congregation vote, a legal structure. Jeff's authority had no such check because his followers didn't believe they were following a man. They believed they were following the literal, unbroken Word of God, and Warren Jeffs was simply the current vessel for it. Disagreeing with him wasn't dissent, it was rejecting God. He used that unchecked authority to arrange marriages, dozens of them across the community, involving members barely into their youth. He called it placing a girl with a husband. Investigators called it what it was: systematic coercion and control, dressed in religious language specifically so that neither the individuals nor their own families would recognize it as a crime in progress. This is testimony from a former FLDS member describing what placement actually looked like from inside the community. Listen for how she describes her own understanding of what was happening to her at the time. Law enforcement spent years trying to build a case that could survive the community's near-total resistance to cooperating with outside authority. A resistance that wasn't fear of Jeffs alone, but genuine religious conviction that speaking to police was itself a sin. In 2011, a Texas jury finally convicted him on multiple felony charges involving the community's youth. Life plus 20 years, a sentence added almost as an insult, since no one on that jury expected Warren Jeffs to live long enough to need the extra 2 decades. He is currently held at the Lewis C. Powledge Unit in Palestine, Texas. He is 68 years old. Here's the detail that makes this case different from every other one on this list, and the reason we opened with him. According to multiple former members who left the community after his conviction, Jeffs is still issuing instructions from inside that cell, communicated through a small circle of loyal intermediaries who visit, correspond, or relay messages through the FLDS's internal structure. Business decisions, marriage arrangements, discipline within the remaining community. A man with no freedom, no pulpit, no congregation standing physically in front of him, and there are people who still treat his word as law. That's not influence, that's religious infrastructure, a system built so thoroughly around one unquestionable voice that removing the man's freedom didn't remove his function. You can put Warren Jeffs behind 3 layers of state security, and the machine he built keeps running without missing a beat, because the machine was never really about Warren Jeffs, the person. It was about the title he carried. He will die in that cell. His lawyers know it. His former followers know it. Even the remaining faithful, the ones who still call him prophet, quietly understand there's no legal path back to freedom for him. Somewhere outside that community right now are the women Jeffs married as children, now adults, some of whom have spoken publicly about rebuilding an adult life with no education beyond what the FLDS provided, no independent financial history, and in some cases, children of their own, born under circumstances no court can ever fully account for in a sentencing hearing. A trial gives a jury a defined window of evidence to weigh. It does not give a survivor a defined window for how long the aftermath lasts. For several of them, that aftermath is still unfolding in real time, decades after the placements happened, and years after the conviction that was supposed to close the chapter. And yet, the community holds. The marriages he arranged still stand. The children born from them are being raised inside the same theology that put his prophet in a Texas prison in the first place. Consider what still issuing instructions actually requires as a practical matter. Every letter Jeff sends out of that facility passes through prison mail screening. Every visitor is logged, photographed, time-stamped. And still, according to multiple accounts from people who left the community after his conviction, guidance attributed to him continues to shape decisions inside the remaining FLDS structure. Which marriages proceed, which members are shunned, which businesses the community's resources flow towards. That is not a failure of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. No prison system on earth is designed to stop belief itself from traveling. You can restrain a body, you cannot subpoena a congregation's faith. This is the uncomfortable asymmetry sitting underneath the very first case in this video, and it is going to resurface again and again as we go. The American justice system is built almost entirely to punish an individual actor for an individual act. It has no real mechanism for dismantling the belief structure that made the act possible in the first place. And for a man who spent decades constructing exactly that belief structure, brick by theological brick, 40 years in a cell doesn't touch the foundation at all. Which raises the exact question this entire video is going to keep circling back to. If a locked cell can't stop a man's authority, what actually does? Case 2 has a different answer. An institution so large that even a guilty plea barely dented it.
Case 2. Naasón Joaquín García. This is the largest congregation on this entire list, over 5 million members across dozens of countries. And what happened to that institution after his leader's conviction is the real story here, not just the crime itself. La Luz del Mundo, the light of the world, is not a small congregation. It is a religious institution headquartered in Guadalajara, Mexico, claiming more than 5 million members spread across dozens of countries, with a physical footprint that includes a purpose-built temple complex in Guadalajara large enough to seat tens of thousands. This is not a storefront church. This is closer in scale to a denomination. Naasón Joaquín García led it the way Warren Jeffs led the FLDS, by inheritance. His father, Samuel Joaquin Flores, built the modern version of the church. When he died in 2014, leadership passed to Naasón as a matter of bloodline, not election. The theology teaches that the Joaquin family holds a unique, divinely ordained apostolic authority, meaning questioning Garcia wasn't just insubordination. It was, to a believing member, questioning God's own chosen structure. In June 2019, California authorities arrested Garcia on charges that eventually included human trafficking and the rape of a minor. The case moved slowly, years of delay, defense motions, procedural fights, the kind of drawn-out legal battle that happens when a defendant has the institutional resources of a multi-million-member church behind his legal team. This is footage from outside the Los Angeles courthouse on the day of his 2021 plea. Watch the size of the crowd that still showed up in support. In June 2021, Garcia pled guilty to 3 felony counts, one of them, forcible oral copulation of a minor. A plea guilt, rather than a trial verdict, changes how this case is remembered publicly. There was no extended courtroom presentation of evidence, no parade of witness testimony carried across weeks of coverage, the way a full trial generates. Garcia's plea closed the legal question relatively quickly, which meant the broader public record of exactly what happened and to how many people is thinner than it would have been had prosecutors been forced to lay out their full case in open court.
That's not a criticism of how the plea was handled. It's a reminder that resolved and fully known are not the same thing, even in cases as significant as this one.
16 years, 8 months. He is serving that sentence right now in a California state facility. And here is the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. La Luz del Mundo did not collapse. It didn't even meaningfully shrink. 5 million members did not wake up the morning after their leader's guilty plea and abandon a faith built across generations, multiple countries, and, for many of them, their entire extended family structure. The institution absorbed the conviction and kept operating, with Garcia's own family retaining significant influence over its leadership, even from behind bars. That's worth sitting with, because it's going to become a pattern across this entire video. Almost every single time, the institution survives the man. The prison sentence closes a courtroom. It does not close a church, a movement, or a following built across decades, and in Garcia's case, across generations of the same families raising their own children inside the same structure that produced the crime in the first place. Think for a moment about the mechanics of a 5 million-member institution absorbing its founder's guilty plea to child rape charges without meaningfully shrinking. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen through ignorance. Plenty of La Luz del Mundo's members, especially outside the family's inner circle, were fully aware of the charges as they unfolded in real time on Mexican and American news coverage. It happens because the institution had, over generations, built redundancy into its own authority structure. Regional leaders, family successors, an entire administrative layer that existed independently of Garcia's day-to-day presence. When he went to prison, that layer simply absorbed his functions and kept operating, the same way a corporation survives the arrest of a CEO, because the org chart beneath him was never actually dependent on any single person. That's a different survival mechanism than Warren Jeff's community, which depends almost entirely on the mystique of one unbroken prophetic voice. Garcia's church survived through bureaucracy. Jeff's survived through belief. Two different structures, the same outcome. The man goes to prison, and the machine keeps running underneath him regardless. So if a conviction that large can't dismantle an institution that size, what actually gets destroyed when a man like this goes to prison? We're going to come back to that question directly later. Right now, we go to a man who watched Warren Jeff's downfall in real time and built the exact same thing anyway.
Case 3. Samuel Bateman. Samuel Bateman didn't inherit a title. He claimed one in real time, in public, after watching the man who held it get arrested. Bateman was part of the wider FLDS adjacent world when Warren Jeffs went to prison in 2011. Rather than treating that conviction as a warning, he treated the vacancy it created as an opportunity. He declared himself a prophet, built a small but devoted following, and began doing exactly what Jeffs had done, taking multiple wives, some of them minors, under the identical theological framework of spiritual placement that had already been proven publicly in a courtroom to destroy children's lives. This is the detail that should disturb you more than the sentence itself. The Jeffs case wasn't hidden information. It was national news, court records, media coverage, documentaries. The mechanism of prophet-sanctioned marriage to minors had already been exposed, prosecuted, and condemned in the most public possible way. Bateman had access to all of it. He built his operation anyway, using the same script,
apparently confident that his community's isolation and loyalty would protect him the way it had briefly protected Jeff's. It didn't. Law enforcement moved faster this time. Investigators who had learned from the Jeff's case knew what patterns to look for, which likely shortened the timeline between Bateman's rise and his arrest compared to how long it took to bring Jeff's to justice. In December 2024, a federal court sentenced him. 50 years. He is currently incarcerated. Effectively a life sentence for a man who chose, with full knowledge of what happened to his predecessor, to run the exact same operation.
It's worth naming plainly what made Bateman's followers willing to accept an unproven, self-declared prophet in the first place, rather than waiting for some more established religious authority to emerge. Communities already conditioned by years inside the FLDS orbit had been trained, long before Bateman arrived, to accept the concept of a single man claiming direct divine authority as entirely ordinary. He didn't have to convince anyone that a prophet could exist and speak for God through one human vessel. That belief was already installed. He only had to convince a small group of people that he specifically was the next vessel, a much smaller, much easier lie to sell to an audience that had already accepted the larger one. What should unsettle you most about Bateman isn't the 50-year sentence, it's the timeline. Jeff's downfall took investigators years to build, in an era before his methods were widely understood or documented. Bateman had the entire case file, essentially, handed to him. Media coverage, trial transcripts, academic and journalistic analysis of exactly how spiritual placement functioned as a grooming mechanism. And he built his operation regardless, apparently calculating that his own community's isolation would insulate him the same way Jeff's had, for years, the FLDS. He was wrong faster than Jeff's was. That's the one piece of progress inside this otherwise bleak pattern. Law enforcement's response time to a copycat structure was measurably shorter than its response time to the original. It is not comfort. It is at best a slightly smaller window of harm before the next Samuel Bateman. 3 men, life plus 20, 16 years, 8 months, 50 years, 3 different courts, 3 different decades, and one identical mechanism underneath every single one of them. A title that, once a follower accepts it, turns ordinary criminal control into something the victim's own belief system will defend without being asked to. Jeff's called it prophecy. Garcia called it apostolic bloodline. Bateman called it exactly what Jeff's called it because he copied it. Different names for an identical trick. That idea, title as machine, is going to come back later in this video, and it's going to connect to a man who never called himself a prophet at all, just a very convincing voice on Christian radio. But first, there's a man who didn't wait to be arrested. He ran, all the way to another country, and it still wasn't enough. Case 4. Victor Barnard. This is the only case on this entire list where the subject actively fled the country before he could be arrested, which means this story has a chase in it, and it didn't end the way he planned. Victor Barnard built something he called River Road Fellowship, based in Minnesota in the 1990s and 2000s. On the surface, it looked like dozens of other small, independent Christian communities scattered across the American Midwest. A charismatic leader, a devoted congregation, a rural compound where members lived in close proximity to their pastor's teaching.
Underneath that surface, Barnard had constructed something much darker, a group of young women within his congregation that he called his maidens, selected while they were still teenagers, isolated from their families, and exploited for his own personal desires under the guise of spiritual devotion. The language he used mattered. Maidens wasn't an accident of vocabulary. It was a deliberate reframing, turning what was, in plain terms, the systematic manipulation and mistreatment of young girls into something that sounded, to the girls themselves and to the wider congregation, like an honor, a calling, a role within God's plan for the community, rather than what it actually was. By 2014, as former members began speaking out and allegations started surfacing publicly, Barnard did something almost none of the other people on this list attempted. He didn't wait for a warrant. He didn't hire a defense attorney and prepare to fight his charges in an American courtroom. He fled, first quietly, then completely off the radar of American law enforcement, eventually surfacing in Brazil, a country with historically slower and more complicated extradition procedures for cases like his. For a while, it worked. Barnard lived under the radar in Brazil while the case against him sat open in Minnesota, those he harmed aging into adulthood, while the man who targeted them remained functionally untouchable. It wasn't federal agents or international police that located him. It was investigative journalists, reporters who tracked leads, financial records, and contacts through the network of former River Road members, eventually finding Barnard and confronting him directly, camera rolling, before law enforcement had even confirmed his location. This is that confrontation, the moment Victor Barnard realized he'd been found. Watch his face in the first 3 seconds before he fully understands what's happening. Extradition proceedings followed the journalist's discovery, and they took time. Cross-border legal processes always do, but they came. Barnard was returned to the United States to face the charges that had been waiting for him since 2014.
Brazil's role in this case deserves a second of attention, separate from the outcome. Barnard didn't choose that country randomly. Historically slower extradition timelines, combined with limited resources devoted by American authorities to actively pursuing him once he'd crossed the border, created exactly the kind of gap a fleeing offender depends on. It took independent journalists working with far fewer resources than a federal task force to close that gap. That's a pattern worth remembering for every future case like this one. Distance alone rarely stops accountability forever. It only stops it long enough for more damage to accumulate in the meantime, and long enough for someone outside the official system to decide the case is still worth pursuing. In 2016, a jury convicted him, not on one count or a handful, but on 59 separate counts of criminal sexual conduct. 59. That number matters because it isn't a prosecutor's estimate of an ongoing pattern. It's 59 individual instances that a jury heard specific evidence on, weighed separately, and believed beyond a reasonable doubt. Each one of those 59 counts represents a moment in a specific girl's adolescence that Victor Barnard took from her. 30 years. He is serving that sentence right now, inside a Minnesota state facility. Running didn't save him.
It cost him 2 extra years of freedom before journalists did what law enforcement hadn't yet managed, and it taught investigators, in this case and every religious fraud case that followed, exactly how far a man like this is willing to go to avoid a courtroom, and exactly how effective a small, dedicated team of reporters can be when a federal agency's resources are stretched thin. There's a detail in Barnard's case worth sitting with longer than a single sentence allows. The girls he called maidens aged into adulthood while he was still free in Brazil. Some of them turned 18, 19, 20, carrying what had been done to them as teenagers, while the man responsible lived openly under a different sky, using a different name in some accounts, waiting to see if anyone would ever come. Justice delayed by an international manhunt isn't an abstraction for the people who have to keep living year after year with an open wound and no verdict attached to it. By the time the extradition process finally concluded and a Minnesota jury returned 59 guilty counts, years had passed that those young women will never get back. Years spent knowing exactly who had hurt them and watching him remain, for a long stretch, entirely out of reach. Barnard ran across an ocean to avoid a courtroom. The next man on this list never had to run anywhere. He built something so respected, so deeply embedded in his own community's trust, that for years nobody even thought to look in his direction.
Case 5. Geronimo Aguilar. Every one of these 15 cases involves a disguise, a costume the perpetrator wore to gain access to people who should have been protected. Geronimo Aguilar's disguise was, in a strange way, the most sympathetic one on this entire list, and that's exactly what made it so effective. Aguilar told the story of a former gang member who found God and turned his life around. It's a narrative American churches love. The prodigal returned, proof that redemption is real and available to anyone, no matter how far gone. He built an entire ministry on that story, the Richmond Outreach Center in Virginia, which grew into one of the state's fastest-growing megachurches, specifically because it was built around programs for at-risk kids. The exact population Aguilar claimed his own past made him uniquely qualified to reach. That access was the entire mechanism. In 2015, a court convicted Aguilar of sexually abusing 2 girls from his own congregation, abuse that, according to court records, began when the girls were minors, inside the very institution that had been built, marketed, and funded specifically as a haven for vulnerable young people. 40 years, he is currently serving that sentence. The Richmond Outreach Center didn't operate in obscurity before Aguilar's conviction. It received local media coverage, community awards, and the kind of civic recognition that comes from visibly, measurably reducing gang involvement among the young people it served. That visibility is exactly what makes this case such a clean example of how a redemption narrative functions as camouflage. The more publicly celebrated the disguise becomes, the more socially costly it is for anyone inside the institution to raise a concern about the man wearing it, because doing so doesn't just risk being wrong about one person, it risks being seen as attacking a story an entire city had already decided to believe in.
The redemption story that built the Richmond Outreach Center into one of Virginia's fastest-growing congregations wasn't just good marketing, and it wasn't incidental to the crime. It was the access mechanism itself. Nobody vets the man who claims he used to be the danger and says convincingly he's changed. Instead, everybody hands him the kids, because doubting him would mean doubting the entire premise of redemption the church was built to preach in the first place. Ask yourself honestly what you would have done in the position of a Richmond parent in the 2000s, watching Aguilar's ministry expand, watching him embraced by local media as proof that redemption was possible even for the most troubled kids in the city. Very few people faced with that story told convincingly enough would have run a background check on a man being celebrated on the local news for saving children exactly like theirs. That is not a failure of individual judgment. It is what a well-constructed disguise is engineered to do. Remove the impulse to verify, because verifying would feel in the moment like an insult to a man's entire redemption arc. Two men, two very different disguises. One ran across an ocean, the other redeemed himself in public, on a stage, in front of an entire city. Next is a man who didn't disguise himself as reformed or holy or prophetic at all. He disguised himself as your financial advisor, and he specifically targeted the generation raised to trust a man who quoted scripture between investment tips. 5 cases in, and I already know part of what's coming in the comment section, because it comes every single time this channel covers a case like this. Someone will point out that the Richmond Outreach Center genuinely helped kids, that La Luz del Mundo's 5 million members included families who found real community, real support, real recovery from addiction and poverty through that institution. That the FLDS, whatever else is true about it, is also a community where people raised children, buried parents, and built lives that felt to them meaningful. I'm not going to pretend that objection is baseless. It isn't. Institutions capable of this kind of harm are very rarely capable of nothing else. That's not a defense of what happened. It's the actual mechanism of how it happened. A ministry that did no visible good, that offered no real community, no real support, would never have accumulated the trust these men spent decades exploiting. The good was never separate from the harm. In most of these cases, the good was the delivery system for it, the reason nobody looked closely enough, soon enough, at the man standing in the center of it all. So when you see a comment defending one of these institutions by pointing to the good it did, understand what that comment is actually describing, whether the person writing it realizes it or not. It's describing exactly why the abuse went unchecked for as long as it did. The two aren't in tension. They're the same story, told from 2 different distances.
Case 6. William Neal Gallagher. This is the first case on this list where the crime wasn't sexual, it was financial. And I want you to pay close attention to who specifically he chose to steal from, because the age range is not a coincidence, it's the entire business model. William Neal Gallagher spent years building a persona in Texas Christian media as Doc Gallagher, the trusted host of a program called The Money Doctor Show, broadcast to a loyal weekly audience that tuned in specifically because Gallagher presented himself as a rare combination, a financial expert who was also a man of faith, someone who would never let scripture and sound investment advice contradict each other. That combination is precisely what made him dangerous. A stranger selling a financial product has to overcome a listener's natural skepticism. A stranger selling a financial product while quoting proverbs between segments, while positioning himself as a fellow believer looking out for his flock's earthly and spiritual welfare in the same breath,
skips that skepticism almost entirely. Gallagher wasn't selling investment advice. He was selling the feeling that a man like him, Christian, folksy, familiar from years of Sunday-adjacent radio, could never be the kind of person who defrauds you. Read that age range again, because it's the detail that turns this from an ordinary financial crime into something closer to a deliberate engineered exploitation. 62 to 91. Gallagher wasn't broadly scamming anyone who'd listen. He built an entire radio persona over years specifically to access a demographic that combines three qualities perfect for a con: decades of accumulated retirement savings, a generational habit of trusting religious authority without question, and, bluntly, a shorter window of years left to discover the fraud, pursue legal recourse, or rebuild what was taken from them before it was too late. This is archival audio from the Doc Gallagher Show, recorded years before the fraud was exposed. Listen to how naturally Gallagher moves between financial guidance and religious reassurance in the same sentence. The scheme itself operated the way most Ponzi structures do. New investor money used to pay returns to earlier investors, creating the illusion of consistent, reliable growth that kept believers reinvesting and recruiting their own friends and fellow congregants into the fund. It worked for years, in part because Gallagher's radio platform gave him a constant stream of new, trusting money to keep the structure afloat, and in part because his victims, elderly, devout, and taught not to question a man who spoke their language, were among the least likely people in America to report a religious authority figure to the SEC. $24 million. When the scheme finally collapsed under its own weight, as every Ponzi structure eventually must, once the flow of new money slows and the payouts owed to existing investors exceed what's coming in, investigators uncovered the true scope of what Gallagher had built and just how narrowly and deliberately he had targeted his victims. He was convicted of securities fraud.
3 consecutive life sentences. Not because the dollar figure alone, on paper, mathematically demanded a sentence of that magnitude. $24 million is a serious number, but by the standards of financial fraud cases in America, it is not the largest ever prosecuted. The severity of Gallagher's sentence reflects something the court explicitly recognized. What he actually stole wasn't only $24 million. It was the last working years of an entire generation's ability to trust a Christian voice on the radio. Years those victims, given their ages, will never get back, in savings or in trust. He is currently incarcerated, and given his sentence, he will not come out. Christian radio occupies a specific trusted place in the daily routines of a lot of older listeners, often a fixed part of a morning drive, a companion during housework, a familiar voice heard for years without ever being seen in person. That parasocial familiarity, built entirely through repetition and consistency over time, is arguably more powerful than the trust built by an in-person pastor a listener sees weekly. A radio host never has an off day a listener witnesses, never shows up late, never seems distracted, never gives a listener a single lived reason for doubt, because the entire relationship exists inside a controlled, edited, one-directional broadcast. Gallagher didn't have to earn trust the way an ordinary financial advisor does, meeting by meeting. His trust was manufactured, uninterrupted, every single morning for years.
$24 million sounds on a screen like an abstraction. It isn't for the specific people who lived it. For a retiree in their late 70s, a life savings built across 40 years of a working career doesn't get rebuilt after a fraud like this. There is no recovering from a scheme like Gallagher's the way a younger investor might recover from a bad year in the market. No remaining working decades to earn it back. Court records and victim statements describe retirees forced back into part-time work in their 80s, forced to sell homes they'd planned to leave to their children, forced to rely on family members for expenses they'd spent a lifetime never to need help with. Gallagher didn't take numbers off an account statement. He took the entire financial floor out from under people who had no time left to rebuild one. Gallagher stole quietly, patiently, over years, through a microphone most of his victims never even had to leave their living rooms to hear. The next case on this list is still active right now as you're watching this, and it involves $50 million, forced labor, and a federal judge who used one specific word on the record to describe what the investigators found.
Case 7. David E. Taylor. I need to slow down for this one. Everything you're about to hear is an allegation, not a settled fact, and the distance between those two things is the entire reason this case belongs in this video at all. $50 million, forced labor, a federal judge who called the allegations horrific, and a man who, as you watch this, has not been convicted of a single thing. David E. Taylor calls himself an apostle, a title that, in the theology of his own ministry, places him in a category of direct spiritual authority above an ordinary pastor. Since 2014, through his organization, Kingdom of God Global Church, Taylor has raised an estimated $50 million in donations from followers who believed his claims of direct personal communication with God. $50 million is, on its own, one of the larger figures on this entire list, larger than what Gallagher took, larger than what Whitehead is accused of extorting. But the money is, according to federal prosecutors, not even the central allegation in this case. In July 2025, federal prosecutors indicted Taylor. The charges: forced labor conspiracy and money laundering. Forced labor is a specific, serious federal charge. It alleges that Taylor didn't simply take donations from willing believers, but compelled people within his organization to work, under conditions investigators are prepared to argue crossed the line into a form of servitude, dressed in the language of ministry and service to God. I need to be precise here because this case is not finished, and precision is the entire point of including it in this video. David E. Taylor has not been convicted of anything. Every single charge against him is, as of this recording, an allegation. One, federal prosecutors believe they have the evidence to prove in front of a jury, but a court has not yet ruled on any of it. Nothing in this segment should be understood as an established fact about what Taylor did. It is a description of what the government is accusing him of, and what a Michigan federal judge found compelling enough to act on before any trial has taken place. Here's what we do know from the public record, independent of guilt or innocence. A Michigan federal judge denied Taylor bond, a decision judges reserve specifically for defendants they consider either a serious flight risk or a danger significant enough that release, even before trial, poses an unacceptable risk. In denying that bond, the judge used one word on the record to describe the allegations: horrific.
Investigators have also stated that Taylor's iCloud account is being searched for images of minors, a detail that, again, is part of an ongoing investigation and has not been the subject of any court ruling or conviction. This is footage from outside the federal courthouse on the day bond was denied. Watch the reaction of the small group of supporters who still showed up.
Taylor is currently in federal detention, awaiting trial. Held, not sentenced. Charged, not convicted. That distinction is not a technicality. It is the difference between what the government believes and what a jury of Taylor's peers will eventually decide in a courtroom based on evidence neither you nor I have fully seen. It's worth pausing on why forced labor charges specifically carried a weight they do in federal court. This isn't a fraud statute built around a dollar figure and a paper trail. It's a statute built around the same legal category as human trafficking, the idea that a person's labor was extracted from them, not through a fair wage and free choice, but through coercion, isolation, or the deliberate exploitation of dependency. So, the $50 million question, literally, is whether David E. Taylor becomes case 16 on a future version of this list, convicted, sentenced, another name added to the tally of men this system eventually caught, or whether he becomes something else entirely, a case that never produces a conviction at all. We genuinely don't know yet. That's not a cliffhanger I built for you. That is the actual, real-time, unresolved status of a federal case still in progress as this video goes up. Kingdom of God Global Church's $50 million in reported donations since 2014 didn't arrive as a handful of large checks from wealthy donors. According to the pattern described in reporting on the organization, it arrived the way most megachurch revenue arrives, in small recurring contributions from a broad base of ordinary believers, each one individually modest, collectively enormous. That structure makes prosecuting a case like this genuinely difficult, even when investigators are confident wrongdoing occurred. There's no single victim's testimony alone proves the scale of the alleged scheme. There are potentially thousands of them, each contributing a piece of a much larger picture that federal prosecutors now have to assemble, count by count, donor by donor, before this case can even reach a jury. But if you want to see exactly what it looks like when a man like this does get convicted, when the money, the title, and the designer clothes finally catch up with him in front of a jury, the next case already happened, and it generated over 1 million views from a single video because the visual contradiction at the center of it was too perfect for the internet to ignore. Case 8. Lamor Whitehead. Lamor Whitehead pastored Leaders of Tomorrow International Ministries in Brooklyn, and he became famous, genuinely, virally famous, far beyond his own congregation, for one specific reason: the way he dressed while doing it. Louis Vuitton suits, Hermes accessories, gold chains that individually cost more than what several of his own congregants earned in a year. Whitehead didn't hide his wealth the way most religious fraudsters instinctively do, understanding that visible luxury invites scrutiny. He leaned into it, treating the designer clothing as part of the ministry's brand, proof to his followers that God rewards faith with material blessing and that his own visible prosperity was evidence his teaching worked. Whitehead first went viral in 2022 for a different reason entirely. He was robbed at gunpoint during a live-streamed church service, several armed men walking into the middle of his sermon while the service was broadcasting live to his online congregation. That robbery, ironically, is what first drew wide public and media attention to Whitehead and his lifestyle,
a tension that would soon turn from sympathy into scrutiny. There's something almost mechanically ironic about how this case unfolded in the public eye. Whitehead became a national story first as a victim, a pastor robbed mid-sermon, a moment that generated genuine public sympathy and concern for his safety. It was only in the weeks that followed, as journalists and investigators started asking basic questions about how a Brooklyn pastor serving a working-class congregation could afford the specific items stolen from him that night, that sympathy curdled into scrutiny. The robbery didn't create the fraud. It created the spotlight that eventually exposed it. A reminder that sometimes accountability doesn't arrive because someone went looking for it. It arrives sideways, through an unrelated crime that happens to shine a light in the wrong direction for the wrong person. This is the live stream from that Sunday service. Watch the moment the armed men enter the frame, and watch how quickly the congregation's reaction shifts from worship to panic. That scrutiny uncovered a pattern federal investigators say went back years. Whitehead had frauded members of his own congregation, people who trusted him with their life savings. In at least one documented instance, a parishioner who handed over tens of thousands of dollars, believing Whitehead would use it to help her purchase a home, while he personally wore clothing that cost more than what he was accused of stealing from some individual victims. In 2023, a jury convicted him on multiple charges, including wire fraud, attempted extortion, and lying to federal investigators. A judge sentenced him in 2024. The extortion charge is worth separating out from the fraud charge because they describe two different kinds of harm. Wire fraud describes Whitehead taking money under false pretenses, telling a congregant their funds would be used one way, then using them another. Extortion describes something more aggressive, using threats, intimidation, or leveraged pressure to compel someone to hand over money or property against their will. A jury finding Whitehead guilty of both means they concluded he didn't only deceive his congregation. In at least some instances, according to the verdict, he pressured them. 9 years. He is currently incarcerated. And here is the number that should genuinely stop you and make you think about how virality actually works. A single YouTube video about his case, just one video from one independent creator, generated over 1.26 million views on its own. Not because the crime was unusually large in dollar terms. Gallagher's 24 million dwarfs whatever Whitehead personally extracted from his congregation. Taylor's alleged 50 million dwarfs it further. It was the suit, the Hermes, the sheer undeniable visual contradiction between man of God serving a working-class Brooklyn congregation and man wearing $11,000 of European leather while allegedly defrauding the people in his own pews. That contradiction, captured in a single photograph, was so stark and so shareable that it turned into one of the most watched religious fraud stories of the decade, far outperforming cases with objectively larger financial harm attached to them. There's a quieter detail in the Whitehead case that got less attention than the Hermes and the gold chains. The specific parishioner who says she handed over tens of thousands of dollars, believing it would help her buy a home. That's not a wealthy donor writing a discretionary check to a charismatic pastor. That's someone's entire down payment, years of saving, a milestone most people only get to reach once, funneled towards a man who was, according to the jury's verdict, using that trust as a revenue stream while photographing himself in designer clothing for social media. The suit generated the views. The down payment is the actual crime, which tells you something important about all 15 of these cases, something we're going to return to directly in the final act of this video. The crime doesn't determine the attention a case receives, the visual does. And that single fact is exactly why the next case, despite being just as serious as anything you've heard so far, almost slipped past the public entirely, because there was no gold chain, no viral photo, just a man's voice on a stage telling strangers things about themselves he shouldn't have known.
Case 9. Brian Carn. This is the case that explains every other case on this list. Once you understand how this man's technique actually works, you will not be able to unsee it in every prophecy, every word from God, every stage performance you have ever watched. Brian Carn built his ministry career on a specific, repeatable performance. Standing on a stage in front of a crowd of strangers and appearing to know things about individual audience members that he had no ordinary way of knowing. A stranger's illness, a dead relative's name, a stranger's private financial trouble named out loud in front of a gasping crowd that experienced the moment as unmistakable proof of divine power. It wasn't divine power. It was a technique, one with a name, a documented history, and a well-understood mechanism among people who study performance and deception for a living. Cold reading is a set of verbal and observational patterns that produce statistically likely guesses, phrased vaguely enough that the audience member fills in the specific details themselves and remembers the exchange as far more precise than it actually was. Combine that baseline technique with something more deliberate, according to multiple documented investigations into similar faith-healing performers going back decades, information gathered before a service even begins, prayer request cards collected at the door, pre-service small talk with ushers and greeters trained to relay details backstage, even license plates in the parking lot cross-referenced against publicly available records, and you get a performance that feels to an unprepared audience indistinguishable from genuine supernatural insight. Watch this prophetic word delivered from the stage to a specific audience member. Then watch a second clip from a different service weeks later, where the underlying structure repeats with a different name and a different detail slotted into an identical pattern. In 2025, federal prosecutors convicted Carn on fraud-related charges connected to this pattern of conduct. 9 months. Sit with that number next to everything else you've already watched tonight. There's a reason cold reading has survived, virtually unchanged as a performance technique for over a century, used by stage mediums long before it was ever used by faith healers. Skeptics societies have run controlled demonstrations showing the same basic technique working on completely secular audiences with no religious framing attached at all. What religious framing adds isn't the mechanism, it's the stakes. A secular cold reading might get you a moment of surprised entertainment. A religious one gets you a donation, a testimony, a lifelong follower convinced they witnessed a miracle. Warren Jeffs, life plus 20. Victor Barnard, 30 years. Geronimo Aguilar, 40 years. Brian Carn, convicted of the same broad category of crime as nearly everyone else on this list, using claimed religious authority to defraud and deceive people. 9 months. That gap is not an accident of a lazy court.
It's a direct reflection of what fraud statutes are actually built to punish, versus what they were never designed to even perceive. A financial fraud charge has a dollar figure attached to it, a specific, provable number a prosecutor can point to on a spreadsheet. Spiritual fraud, a grieving stranger's genuine belief that a man on a stage was speaking directly to their dead mother, or naming their private illness through divine insight rather than a hidden earpiece, has no dollar figure at all, because what was actually stolen wasn't money in that moment. It was that person's grip on reality, their trust in their own judgment, redirected entirely to a performer using a magician's trick. The law can't sentence a man for stealing something it has no mechanism to price. So it prices what little of the scheme it can see: the specific fraud counts, the traceable transactions, and the deeper theft goes almost entirely unpunished.
Here's what makes cold reading so durable as a technique across 4 decades of exposure. It doesn't actually require the performer to be right very often. A handful of specific, memorable hits, the illness named correctly, the dead relative identified by name, get discussed, shared, and remembered by the entire congregation for years. The dozens of vague misses in between get forgotten within minutes, because the human brain is wired to remember confirmation and discard the noise around it. Carn didn't need supernatural powers. He needed a large enough sample size of guesses and a congregation primed to remember only the hits. That is mathematically not a miracle. It's a numbers game dressed as one. Remember the profit mechanism from Warren Jeffs at the very start of this video. This is the missing piece underneath it. It was never really about a title granting genuine supernatural authority. It's a repeatable technique, informant networks, controlled information, practiced cold reading, dressed in whatever costume a specific audience already trusts. Jeffs called it prophecy. Carn called it a word of knowledge. Different vocabulary, identical machine underneath. If the machine is that insistent, that repeatable, across completely different denominations and decades, what happens when it's aimed not at strangers' wallets or their grief, but directly at children who have nowhere else to go? The next case is the hardest one to tell in this entire video, and it is, right now, as you're watching this, still playing out inside a Missouri courtroom. Stop here for a moment, because there's a pattern in the 9 cases you've already watched that's easy to miss when they're presented one after another, but impossible to unsee once it's pointed out. Look at where each of these men found their access. Jeffs inside a closed religious community with almost no outside contact. Garcia inside an institution where questioning leadership was itself framed as a sin. Barnard in an isolated rural compound. Aguilar specifically targeting kids already flagged as at risk. Gallagher specifically targeting the elderly. Taylor, allegedly, inside an organization built around absolute obedience to an apostle. Whitehead, inside a congregation of working-class believers with limited financial literacy around fraud. Carn, inside a crowd of strangers desperate enough for a miracle to suspend their own skepticism. Every single one of them, without exception, operated inside a closed information environment, a group of people whose primary and often only source of trusted information was the man committing the crime against them. That's not incidental.
It is, structurally, the precondition every single case on this list required in order to function for as long as it did. The moment outside information entered, a journalist, a former member, a news investigation, a reporter with a radio scanner, the mechanism started to fail every single time. Keep that in mind as we go through the final 6 cases, because the man closing out this video built the single most information-isolated audience of anyone on this entire list, and he built it entirely legally on national television in plain sight.
Case 10, Stephanie Householder. I want to be exact about where this case stands before I say another word, because it's still active, and precision here isn't optional. Stephanie Householder co-founded Circle of Hope Girls Ranch alongside her husband, Boyd. On paper, and in the way it was marketed to desperate families, it was a Christian boarding school for at-risk girls, the kind of place a struggling parent might turn to as a last resort, trusting the word Christian attached to the name to mean above almost anything else that their daughter would finally be safe. In 2021, prosecutors charged Householder with more than 100 felony counts spanning child abuse, neglect, and endangerment. Her husband and co-founder, Boyd, died before the case could reach trial, leaving Stephanie to face the remaining charges alone. She currently faces 21 felony counts. The reduction from the original count, more than 100 felony charges spanning both Boyd and Stephanie Householder, down to 21 facing Stephanie alone, reflects a common and often misunderstood reality of how cases like this move through the legal system. Some charges get consolidated. Some depend on evidence or testimony tied specifically to Boyd, whose death before trial removed him from the case entirely, along with any charges that couldn't be independently proven against Stephanie alone. A shrinking charge count is not on its own evidence of innocence. It's frequently just what happens when a sprawling initial investigation gets narrowed down to what a prosecutor believes can actually be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury years later, with one of the 2 original defendants no longer to stand trial. I want to be exact about where this stands because it matters here more than almost anywhere else in this video. Stephanie Householder has not been convicted of anything. She has been charged. The trial is ongoing as of this recording. Every detail I describe in this segment is what the state alleges and believes it can prove in front of a jury, not a fact a court has yet found to be true. But here is what makes this case belong specifically in the mechanism tier of this video, regardless of how the trial ultimately resolves. The at-risk framing built into the institution's own name and marketing. A girl sent to Circle of Hope had, almost by definition, already been failed once, by a family in crisis, by a school system that couldn't accommodate her, by a previous placement that hadn't worked out. That prior failure is precisely what made her sendable to an institution like this in the first place. It's not a coincidence that this pattern shows up once in this video. It's the raw material that nearly every institution on this entire list needed in order to function at all. A person already primed to trust an unfamiliar authority figure, because the alternative, trusting no one, having nowhere left to go, felt unbearably worse. Consider what it actually took for a family to arrive at Circle of Hope as an option in the first place. By the time a parent is searching for a residential placement for their daughter, they have typically already exhausted the ordinary systems available to them: school counselors, local therapists, family intervention, sometimes the juvenile justice system itself. Circle of Hope and institutions like it don't compete with functional families and well-supported kids. They compete with the alternative of having exhausted every other option and having nowhere else left to turn. That is an extraordinary amount of leverage to hold over a desperate parent. And, according to the more than 100 felony counts originally filed, it is leverage prosecutors allege was used against the very girls that leverage was supposed to protect. That line is going to matter more than almost anything else in this video, and it's going to return in the final act because it's the real answer to the question I asked you at the very start. Write it down if you need to. You've now heard 10 cases, 4 tiers of consequence, from life plus 20 all the way to 9 months. Before we go to the final 5, I need a moment to make sure you understand exactly how deep this goes. Before we go further, I need you to sit with the actual scale of what you've just heard. 10 names, a prophet still giving orders from a Texas prison, a megachurch with 5 million members standing entirely undisturbed after its leader's guilty plea, a radio host who stole $24 million specifically from people old enough to be somebody's grandparent, a man who convinced strangers God was speaking directly through him using a technique with a documented name you can look up on Wikipedia right now. If you've watched this far, you already understand this isn't really a video about 10, soon to be 15, individual criminals. It's a video about one machine, wearing different denominations like different disguises, that runs on trust, targets vulnerability by design, and gets punished based on how easy the crime is to put a number on, not how much actual damage it did to a real human life. Subscribe if you haven't, because what's coming next includes a case less than a month old as I record this, a congregation that found out their pastor of 7 years was under arrest before anyone in leadership told them why he'd quietly resigned 2 months earlier. And it ends with the one name on this entire list who has never spent a single day in prison for any of it. Here's your question for the comments, and I want a real answer, not just an emoji. If you had to pick one person from this list to serve Tony Alamo's sentence in their place, 175 years, who would it be and why? I'll be reading.
Case 11. Joe Campbell. Every other pending case on this list involves a relatively short window of alleged access, a handful of years, maybe a decade. This one is different. This one spans 50 years, 4 states, and thousands of children. Joe Campbell spent 50 years ministering to children, 4 states, multiple institutions, thousands of kids who passed through programs under his direction over the course of a career that spanned half a century. Central to that career was Camp Bell, an Assemblies of God summer camp in Missouri that operated, according to Campbell's own public account of his ministry, for decades under his leadership. In December 2025, U.S. Marshals arrested him, not quietly, at a lawyer's office or a courthouse, the way many of these arrests happen. They took him at his own camp, the exact location where he'd spent 50 years building the reputation that made this arrest, for so many people who knew him, almost unthinkable. The charges: first-degree rape and lewd or indecent acts with a child under 16. If convicted, he faces up to life in prison. I want to say that phrase again, deliberately, slower. If convicted. Joe Campbell has not been found guilty of anything by any court. Everything that follows in this segment is what investigators and prosecutors allege, not a settled, proven fact. Here is what should trouble you, regardless of how this specific trial ends.
An NBC News investigation into Campbell's history found what reporters described in their own words as decades of missed warnings. Not one overlooked complaint from one family one time, decades. Which means the real question this case forces onto the table isn't only did Joe Campbell commit these specific crimes, it's a much larger one. How many separate institutions over how many separate years had a genuine opportunity to stop this and simply didn't? This is footage from Campbell's arrest at the camp property. Watch the reaction of the staff standing nearby, several of whom, according to reporting, had worked alongside him for years. 50 years of access, 4 states, a 5-decade paper trail investigators are still actively working through right now as this case moves towards trial.
A decades of missed warnings finding, the kind NBC's investigation surfaced, typically doesn't mean decades of silence. It usually means decades of complaints that went somewhere, a supervisor, a board member, a fellow staff member, and stopped there, never escalated to law enforcement, never shared with the families whose children remained enrolled. Each individual decision to let a complaint die quietly inside the organization might have felt to the person making it like giving a respected 50-year veteran the benefit of the doubt. Multiplied across decades and multiple states, those individually reasonable-sounding decisions add up to exactly the kind of institutional failure this video keeps returning to. 50 years is long enough to span multiple entirely different eras of child protection policy in America, before mandatory reporting laws existed in their current form, before background check systems were digitized and shared across state lines, before the specific vocabulary of grooming entered mainstream institutional training. Campbell's career began in one regulatory world and continued uninterrupted into a completely different one. And according to the NBC investigation, the warnings that surfaced along the way were handled the same way regardless of which era they occurred in, quietly, internally, without ever reaching the families whose children were still, at that moment, inside his programs. A system that failed to stop him in the 1980s and a system that failed to stop him in the 2020s are not really two separate failures. They're the same failure, wearing 40 additional years of institutional knowledge that somehow never translated into action. Hold that number, 50 years of unquestioned access, because the next case took less than 5 years to reach an eerily similar kind of headline, and it's the case this entire video has been building toward from the very first sentence I spoke to you.
Case 12. Tony Alamo. We're going back to where we started this video, Tony Alamo, because I promised you in the opening 30 seconds that I would explain exactly how a man ends up with a sentence so enormous it stops functioning as a number and starts functioning as a message. Alamo built a ministry empire that stretched across multiple states, Tony Alamo Christian Ministries, a network that expanded outward from its Arkansas base, generating income through everything from mail-order sermons and recorded tapes to a clothing line that, at the peak of its cultural relevance, dressed celebrities and musicians who had no idea or chose not to know what was funding it. Underneath that public-facing media empire sat a decades-long systematic pattern of taking young individuals across state lines for illicit purposes. Young members within his own congregation treated as property to be assigned and reassigned according to Alamo's own decisions.
In 2009, a jury convicted him on 10 felony counts. 10. And the sentence that followed wasn't calculated the way most American prison sentences are. It was calculated deliberately as an unambiguous statement. The court wasn't really asking how long should this specific man serve for these 10 specific counts. It was asking a different question entirely. How do we make absolutely certain, through every possible legal mechanism, parole boards, appeals, compassionate release petitions filed decades from now by aging attorneys, that this man never again, under any circumstance, walks free? 175 years. A sentence like that closes every single door permanently, purposely, by design, leaving no ambiguity for any future court to interpret differently. He died in federal prison in May 2017 at 78 years old. From the day of his conviction to the day of his death, Tony Alamo never once spent a single night outside a federal facility. Ministries built the way Alamo's was rarely disappear cleanly the moment their founder is convicted. Merchandise doesn't stop circulating. Recordings don't stop playing in some smaller remaining pockets of the following. Even after his 2009 conviction and his 2017 death, some version of the organization's identity and materials persisted in smaller form, a reminder that a criminal conviction targets the man, not the media empire, the branding, or the residual belief he left in the people who never stopped defending him, even from outside prison walls. That's the top of the scale you saw in the opening 30 seconds of this entire video. 175 years, a number so large it stopped functioning as a sentence and became a warning label instead. Now hold it firmly in your mind, because the bottom of that exact same scale, inside the exact same American justice system, belongs to a man we haven't formally introduced yet.
There is a specific kind of grief that belongs only to the people who loved Tony Alamo's victims, and it has nothing to do with the sentence itself. It's the grief of knowing the number 175 years, closed every legal door, and still didn't undo a single day of what happened inside that ministry before the conviction. A sentence engineered for maximum permanence is, in its own way, an admission that permanence was the only tool the court had left. It couldn't return anyone's adolescence. It could only guarantee with total legal certainty that the man responsible would never again have the freedom to take anyone else's. But there are two more cases first, both of them recent, both of them still unresolved, and both of them built on a silence that should genuinely make you angry. 12 cases down, 3 left, and all 3 of them are still open. I want to take a moment here before we go further to talk honestly about what that presumption of innocence actually costs, because it cuts in more than one direction, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. For a defendant, the presumption of innocence is a bedrock legal protection, and it should be. Nobody deserves to be treated as guilty by an entire nation before a jury of their peers has heard the evidence against them and made that determination. But for an alleged victim, that same presumption of innocence often means living for months or years, watching the person they say harmed them appear in headlines carefully hedged with words like alleged. A legally necessary hedge that can, from the outside, feel like the world isn't quite ready to believe them yet.
Both of those things are true at once, and this video isn't going to pretend there's a clean resolution to that tension. What I can promise is precision. Every open case in this video gets the same treatment. The allegation stated plainly, the legal status stated plainly, and no pretending either one is a settled fact before a court says so.
Case 13, Isaiah Banks. This is the freshest case in the entire video, weeks old, not years, and it's built around a silence that should make you deeply uncomfortable. The specific silence of a congregation that was lied to by omission, not by any direct statement. Isaiah Banks became pastor of Second Pilgrim Baptist Church in Philadelphia in September 2017. For 7 years, he held that pulpit, building the kind of long-term trust and familiarity that only comes from nearly a decade of Sunday mornings, funerals, weddings, and the ordinary rhythms of a congregational life. In April 2026, he resigned, quietly, no public explanation offered to the congregation he'd led for 7 years. The kind of resignation that in most communities gets treated as an entirely private matter, a pastor moving on, perhaps for health reasons, perhaps for family, perhaps for reasons the congregation doesn't feel entitled to ask about out loud. 2 months later, he was arrested, charged with sexual exploitation and abuse of minors. According to prosecutors, forensic evidence recovered from his phone showed that he had solicited explicit videos from a teenage boy, in exchange, in at least some of the alleged transactions, for money or simply for food. I want you to sit with the word food for a moment, because it tells you something specific about what prosecutors allege was happening. Not luxury, not even primarily cash in the exchanges described. Food. Whatever vulnerability made that transaction possible in that teenager's life. Hunger, instability at home, something else entirely. Banks either already knew about it or found it, and is accused of using it as the currency for the exploitation. Banks has not been convicted. These remain allegations the state believes it can prove at trial. But here is what is already established, independent of that trial's eventual outcome. His own congregation was never told why his pastor left for 7 years. They learned it from the arrest, not from their church leadership, not from their denomination, from the police. This is a local news clip of congregation members reacting outside Second Pilgrim Baptist Church on the day of the arrest. Watch how many of them describe finding out from a news alert, not from anyone inside the church. That's not merely a legal detail sitting at the edge of this case. That is an institutional choice. Somebody, somewhere inside that church's leadership structure decided a quiet, unexplained exit was preferable to an honest one. Whether that decision came from simple ignorance of what was actually happening, or from a deliberate instinct to protect the institution first, we don't yet know. But it is the identical silence Circle of Hope's entire structure depended on. It is the identical silence that Joe Campbell's 50 years of unquestioned access go unchallenged for so long. Institutions protect themselves first, investigate second, if at all. That pattern has now repeated in nearly every single case in this video before it was ever formally proven, and often before anyone outside the institution was even paying attention. 7 years is long enough for a congregation to build genuine memory around a pastor. Baptisms he performed, funerals he led, the ordinary accumulated trust of a Sunday-to-Sunday relationship that most members would have described right up until June 26, 2026, as one of the more stable relationships in their spiritual lives.
That's precisely what makes the 2-month silence between his resignation and his arrest so damaging on its own terms. A congregation that trusted a man for 7 years deserved at minimum an honest account of why he left. What they got instead was a police report. There's a specific cruelty embedded in the structure of what prosecutors allege happened to the teenage boy at the center of the Banks case. The exchange of explicit material for money or food isn't described as a single incident, but as a pattern, meaning if the allegations are proven true, whatever vulnerability existed in that teenager's life wasn't discovered once and exploited once. It was identified and then returned to, over time, by an adult she had every reason to trust as a spiritual leader in her community. That repetition, more than almost any other detail in this case, is what separates an isolated failure of judgment from a sustained pattern of exploitation. And it's exactly the kind of pattern a trial is designed to establish, count by count, if the case proceeds as prosecutors currently expect. One more pending case, and then we move to the man this entire video has been building from the very first sentence. This next arrest happened mid-sermon in front of an entire congregation with federal agents walking down the center aisle while the service was still in progress.
Case 14. Joram Núñez Joaquin. Joram Núñez Joaquin led Light of the World Church in Cicero, Illinois. In 2025, federal agents arrested him, not quietly at his home or office, the way most of these arrests happen away from public view. They took him mid-service, walking down the center aisle of his own church in front of the entire congregation he was actively leading in worship at that exact moment. The charges connect him to an alleged child sex trafficking operation. According to prosecutors, Núñez Joaquin posed as an attorney, a second, entirely false layer of authority stacked directly on top of the religious authority he already held, specifically to coerce victims into staying silent, threatening them with the appearance of legal consequences if they reported what was happening to them. He has pleaded not guilty. The case remains ongoing. His church closed its doors entirely following the arrest. A church closing in the immediate aftermath of an arrest like this reveals something about how thin the line can be between a functioning religious institution and a criminal operation wearing its structure. Light of the World Church didn't have the layered administrative redundancy that let La Luz del Mundo continue functioning after Garcia's arrest. It had one central figure, and when federal agents removed him, there was, apparently, nothing underneath sturdy enough to keep the doors open. Whether that reflects a smaller congregation, a less developed institutional structure, or simply how thoroughly the alleged trafficking operation had been built directly around Núñez Joaquin personally, rather than around any broader ministry, the result is the same. The moment the man was gone, so was the church.
I want to point out something specific about the timing and manner of this particular arrest, because it stands apart from almost everything else on this list. Most of these men were taken quietly, at home, at an office, after a warrant had already been prepared, well outside public view, specifically to avoid the kind of spectacle that could complicate a prosecution. Núñez Joaquin was taken in the middle of a live sermon in front of the people who trusted him most, at the exact moment he was actively performing the very authority he now stands accused of weaponizing against vulnerable victims. Federal agents made a deliberate choice with that timing.
whether it was purely tactical, concern he might flee if warned in advance, or carried a symbolic weight investigators understood clearly. The effect on that congregation was the same either way. They watched the entire mechanism of his authority collapse in real time, inside the very room it had been built specifically to control. The alleged use of a false attorney identity in this case deserves its own moment of attention, separate from the trafficking allegations themselves. Posing as legal counsel isn't just another lie layered on existing religious authority. It's a targeted exploitation of the one instinct a frightened victim might otherwise rely on, the instinct to seek legitimate legal advice about whether to report what happened to them. If prosecutors are correct, Núñez Joaquin didn't just allegedly abuse the trust his congregation placed in him as a pastor. He is accused of intercepting the exact moment a victim might have sought outside help and impersonating the very kind of protection they were looking for. That's 14 names, life sentences, decades, months, cases still wide open, unresolved, playing out in real time. Every single one of them eventually faced a courtroom of some kind. Whatever the outcome, conviction, sentencing, or an ongoing trial, the system engaged with all 14 of them, however slowly, however imperfectly. Now I'm going to show you the 15th name, and he is the actual reason this entire video exists, because he is the only person on this list the system never touched at all.
Case 15. Peter Popoff. We saved him for last on purpose. In 1986, on live national television, Peter Popoff was exposed. A stage magician named James Randi, working with a hidden radio scanner, intercepted the exact frequency Popoff's own wife was using backstage to feed him information about individual audience members through a concealed earpiece. The identical word of knowledge technique we already broke down in detail with Brian Carn, except this was the original, foundational blueprint, caught live, on camera, decades before Carn ever set foot on a stage. It should have ended his career permanently, and for a while it genuinely looked like it had. The exposure was humiliating, thorough, and impossible to explain away. In 1987, Popoff declared bankruptcy. And then he rebuilt. Not quietly, not in a smaller, chastened form, humbled by public exposure into some more modest ministry. He rebuilt into an operation that today generates an estimated $23 million a year, selling bottles of miracle spring water to an audience skewed heavily towards low-income elderly believers, people managing chronic illness, living on fixed incomes, carrying exactly the kind of desperation that makes spending scarce grocery money on a blessed bottle of topwater feel, in a moment of genuine hope, like a reasonable and even wise decision. This is a modern Popoff broadcast, recorded well after his exposure was public record. Watch the audience closely. Watch exactly who he's speaking to and how he's speaking to them. The Federal Trade Commission investigated him. No charges were ever filed. No charges, not found not guilty, not case dismissed for lack of evidence. No charges were ever filed at all, which means Peter Popoff has never once had to stand in a courtroom and answer, under oath, for a single dollar of the estimated hundreds of millions his ministry has generated across 4 decades of continuous operation, using a technique that was caught, exposed, and thoroughly documented on national television before the majority of his current audience had even been born. Now put him next to everyone else you've met tonight. Warren Jeffs, life plus 20, in a Texas cell, 68 years old,
will die there. Victor Barnard, 30 years, Minnesota, 59 separate counts. William Neal Gallagher, 3 consecutive life sentences for $24 million taken from the elderly. Tony Alamo, 175 years, dead in a federal medical facility. Peter Popoff, free, tonight, broadcasting. There's a version of this story where Popoff is simply a con man who got lucky, slipping through gaps in an otherwise functional regulatory system. The actual history doesn't support that reading. The FTC investigation into his operation wasn't a cursory glance. It examined the same fundamental mechanics James Randi had already exposed on national television. Unverifiable medical claims, a product with no demonstrable effect being sold as a cure, a target audience selected specifically for its desperation and its trust in religious authority. Investigators saw the same pattern regulators see in countless other fraud cases, and still, no charges. The difference wasn't the evidence, it was the wrapper the evidence came in. A ministry instead of a company, a blessing instead of a product claim, a legal gray zone that religious speech occupies nowhere else in American commercial life. This is the answer to the question I asked you at the very start of this video. What determines whether a man like this dies in a cell or dies rich? It is not the scale of the harm he caused. Popoff's estimated hundreds of millions across 4 decades dwarfs Gallagher's 24 million many times over. It is not the number of victims. Popoff's audience over 40 years almost certainly outnumbers every congregation on this entire list combined. It is whether the crime produces a specific piece of paper a prosecutor can point to in a courtroom, a wire transfer, a trafficking charge, a signed document with a dollar figure attached to it. Popoff's crime is a promise, a blessing on a bottle of water, a feeling he sold a frightened elderly woman that her failing health, her shrinking finances, her fear of dying alone could be fixed by mail order. There is no statute anywhere in America that prices a stolen feeling. So there is no charge filed against him, and there is no sentence.
Why does this keep happening? Not why did these 15 specific people do what they did? Why does the underlying pattern itself keep reproducing generation after generation, from an FLDS compound in Texas to a Brooklyn pulpit to a girls' ranch in rural Missouri? 3 reasons. None of them are going away on their own, and none of them are unique to any one of these 15 cases. First, religious institutions in the United States operate with a degree of financial and internal opacity that almost no other type of American organization enjoys. Churches are not required to file the same public financial disclosures a standard nonprofit or a publicly traded corporation must. That opacity is not by itself automatically sinister. The overwhelming majority of churches never come close to abusing it. But it is the exact structural gap that every single financial case on this list, from Gallagher's Ponzi scheme to Taylor's alleged forced labor operation to Whitehead's fraud, operated inside without meaningful outside oversight until law enforcement, not a regulator, finally intervened. Second, the specific psychological authority carried by religious leadership makes internal reporting inside these institutions extraordinarily difficult, even when members do suspect something is wrong. When Isaiah Banks' congregation wasn't told why his pastor of 7 years suddenly resigned, that wasn't a unique or unusual failure.
That was the institution's default to its single most common instinct across every one of these cases: protect the structure and its reputation first, investigate second, if at all. Third, and this is the thread that connects every tier of this entire video, from Warren Jeffs to Peter Popoff, vulnerability was never incidental to how these 15 people operated. It was the resource they were mining deliberately over years. At-risk girls at Circle of Hope, elderly believers on Gallagher's radio show, specifically targeted by age, a hungry teenager for whom food allegedly became currency in Isaiah Banks's case, an elderly viewer with a failing heart and a shrinking bank account watching Peter Popoff's broadcast tonight. Every one of these institutions succeeded, for as long as they succeeded, by finding people who had already been failed once by something else entirely, and offering to be the one thing that finally didn't fail them. What's genuinely changed structurally since Popoff's public exposure in 1986? Almost nothing. The earpiece technique exposed on live television that year is functionally the same one Brian Carn used in a different form nearly 40 years later. The financial opacity that let Gallagher operate a Ponzi scheme through a Christian radio program is the same opacity David E. Taylor's Kingdom of God Global Church is currently accused of exploiting right now in an active federal case. Regulation hasn't closed this gap. Public exposure, the Randy investigation, decades of news coverage, documentaries like this one, has, at best, made some of these operators marginally more careful about how they cover their tracks. It has not made the underlying structure any harder for the next Peter Popoff or the next Samuel Bateman to exploit. If there's a genuinely hopeful thread running through this entire video, it's not found in any courtroom. It's found in the people who broke these cases open in the first place. And notice how rarely that person was a regulator or a government agency acting purely on its own initiative. It was investigative journalists tracking Victor Barnard to Brazil. It was a stage magician with a radio scanner exposing Peter Popoff in 1986. It was an NBC News investigation surfacing decades of missed warnings around Joe Campbell. It was former FLDS members risking total excommunication from their own families to describe on camera what placement actually meant to the girls living through it.
Every single case in this video that ever got resolved at all was resolved because someone outside the institution, a reporter, a former member, a whistleblower with nothing left to lose, did the work the institution itself refused to do. That's not a system working as designed. That's a system being dragged, case by case, name by name, toward accountability by people who had no legal obligation to do any of it, and did it anyway. If you want to know where to put your attention and your trust going forward, it's there, not in the regulators, in the people willing to knock on a door nobody else would. Every case in this video ends legally at a sentencing hearing or a plea agreement, or in 5 cases, a trial date still waiting on the calendar. But every case also leaves behind a group of people this video hasn't spent enough time on yet: the ones who stayed. The ones who sat in those pews for years, who believed, who built friendships and marriages and entire social lives around a congregation that turned out to be built, at least in part, around a predator. Leaving isn't as simple as it sounds from the outside. For members of closed communities like the FLDS or River Road Fellowship, leaving can mean losing every relationship they've ever had. Parents, siblings, spouses, children, all still inside a structure that treats departure as a form of betrayal against God Himself.
For members of more conventional congregations like Second Pilgrim Baptist or Leaders of Tomorrow International Ministries, leaving is legally simpler, but psychologically no less complicated. It means admitting that years of Sunday mornings, of genuine spiritual meaning, of real community, were built around a lie the person didn't see or couldn't let themselves see until law enforcement made it impossible to ignore. Researchers who study institutional betrayal, harm caused not by the original perpetrator, but by the institution's failure to protect the people who trusted it, describe a specific compounding injury that happens to congregation members who weren't directly abused, but who devoted years of their lives, their money, and their trust to an institution that turned out to be a vehicle for someone else's crimes. Think back through every case in this video, and you'll notice this pattern sitting quietly underneath almost all of them. La Luz del Mundo's 5 million members absorbing Garcia's conviction. Second Pilgrim Baptist's congregation finding out about Banks's resignation 2 months late from a police report instead of their own leadership. Light of the World Church's members watching federal agents walk down their own center aisle mid-service. Every one of these communities had to process in public, in real time, the exact same realization. The man they trusted with their spiritual lives was never who he claimed to be. Some of these communities will rebuild under new leadership, more transparent, more accountable, genuinely improved by the crisis that exposed the old regime. Others will quietly dissolve, their members scattering to other congregations or away from organized religion entirely, carrying a specific, hard-won skepticism about religious authority that will likely follow them for the rest of their lives. That's the cost this video's sentencing numbers can never fully capture. A prison term has an end date, even when that end date is 175 years away. A community's capacity to trust doesn't come with a release date at all.
The money is mostly gone. What wasn't seized went to defense attorneys, went to restitution funds that pay out cents on every dollar actually taken, or, in Peter Popoff's case, went straight into next year's broadcast budget. If you take one thing from this video and carry it into whatever congregation, community, or institution you trust, let it be this: trust that cannot survive a single outside question is not faith. It is architecture. It is a structure built, whether the person at the top intended it consciously or not, to keep verification out. A leader who welcomes scrutiny, who answers hard questions plainly, who allows financial transparency without treating the request as an attack on his character or his calling. That leader has nothing in common with the 15 people in this video, no matter how similar the sermon might sound on a Sunday morning. The difference was never the volume of the preaching. It was always, in every single one of these 15 cases, what happened the moment someone finally asked to see behind the curtain. And these 15 people are, right now, exactly what this video's title told you they would be. Still behind bars, or waiting to find out if they will be, or free tonight, doing it again. I don't have a tidy resolution for you. Documentaries about ongoing systems rarely get one, and I'd rather leave you with an honest, unfinished picture than a false, comforting one. 5 of these cases don't have endings yet. One of them, by every indication available right now, may never get one at all. That's not a failure of this video's research. It's the actual current state of accountability for religious fraud and abuse in America as of the exact week I recorded this. What I can tell you is what I've watched happen case after case, video after video on this channel for as long as I've been making them. The pattern doesn't stop because we named it.
It stops, case by case, when enough people refuse to look away from a red flag they would have once excused. When a congregation asks the hard question instead of trusting the easy answer. When a journalist keeps digging past the point where it would have been easier to stop. When a former member, at real personal cost, decides the truth matters more than the community they're about to lose by telling it. That's not a system. It's 1,000 individual decisions made by people with no legal obligation to make them, choosing to make them anyway. 15 names in this video exist because enough of those decisions were eventually made by someone. The 16th name, whoever it turns out to be, wherever they're operating right now, uninvestigated, unnamed, unsuspected, is waiting on the same kind of decision from someone who hasn't made it yet. I am Sharon, and whatever verdict you reach, in the comments, in your own mind, in the quiet minute after this video ends, I trust you to reach it honestly, the same way I've tried to build this entire investigation, fact by fact, name by name, number by number, all the way to this final second. And I'll see you on the other side.